The morning of September 15th started like any other at Kensington Palace. Birds chirped in the royal gardens, staff moved quietly through marble corridors, and young Prince Louis giggled as he chased butterflies near the ornate fountain. No one could have predicted that by afternoon, a single moment of childhood curiosity would transform an ordinary royal guard into a hero, and a routine day into a life-or-death rescue that would make headlines around the world. What happens when a 4-year-old prince wanders into danger, and the only person standing between life and death is a guard who has never faced anything more threatening than an over-eager photographer? This is the story of Marcus Thompson, a man who signed up to stand still and look impressive, but who discovered that true courage isn't about following protocol. It's about throwing the rule book away when someone's life hangs in the balance. In the next few minutes, you'll witness how a simple game of hide-and-seek nearly became a royal tragedy, how black smoke and flames turned a palace wing into a death trap, and how one man's split-second decision to break every rule in the book saved not just a young prince's life, but changed the meaning of duty forever. Sometimes heroes wear crowns. Sometimes they wear armor. And sometimes they wear the red tunic of a royal guard who simply refused to let a child die on his watch. Marcus Thompson had always believed that being a royal guard was the most boring job in the world. Standing motionless for hours, watching tourists take selfies and making sure no one got too close to the royal family seemed like easy money. At 28 years old, the former army sergeant had traded his combat boots for polished black shoes and his camouflage uniform for the iconic red tunic that made him look like a toy soldier come to life. The morning shift at Kensington Palace started at 6 o'clock sharp. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, as he always did, checking his appearance in the staff mirror near the servants' entrance. His black bearskin hat sat perfectly straight, his red tunic was pressed without a single wrinkle, and his white gloves were spotless. The other guards often joked that Marcus treated his uniform like a sacred relic, but he believed that if you were going to represent the crown, you should look the part. "Morning, Thompson," called out James Morrison, the head of palace security, as he walked past with a steaming cup of tea. Morrison was a thick-set man in his 50s, who had been protecting royals since before Marcus was born. His gray mustache twitched slightly as he spoke, a habit Marcus had noticed whenever the older man was trying not to smile. "Good morning, sir," Marcus replied with a sharp nod. Even after 2 years on the job, he still maintained the military formality that had been drilled into him during his service in Afghanistan. Some habits die hard, and showing respect to authority was one of them. The palace was already buzzing with activity. Housekeeping staff moved through the corridors like ghosts, tidying rooms that were already spotless and polishing furniture that gleamed like mirrors. Kitchen workers prepared breakfast trays that would be served on china worth more than Marcus's annual salary. Gardeners tended to flower beds that looked like they belonged in a fairy tale, and security personnel conducted their morning sweep of the grounds. Prince Louis had always been Marcus's favorite member of the royal family to watch over. The 4-year-old had an infectious laugh and a curiosity that seemed to get him into trouble at least 3 times a day. Unlike his older siblings, who had learned to move through the palace with practiced royal grace, Louis still bounced when he walked and asked questions about everything he saw. "Why do you wear that big hat?" Louis had asked Marcus during his first week on the job. "Does it hurt your head? Can I try it on?" Marcus had wanted to answer, but royal protocol was crystal clear. Guards were to remain silent and motionless unless directly addressed by senior royals or security personnel. But the little prince's bright blue eyes and gap-toothed grin made it impossible not to smile even if he couldn't speak. That Tuesday morning started with Prince Louis escaping from his morning lessons. Marcus watched from his post near the East Wing entrance as the young prince darted past his governess, Miss Adelaide, who was trying her best to keep up while maintaining her dignity in a long black dress and sensible shoes. "Prince Louis, please return to the study immediately," Miss Adelaide called out in her crisp British accent, but the little prince was already around the corner, his small feet pattering against the marble floor like raindrops on a window. Marcus suppressed a smile as he heard Louis giggling somewhere in the distance. The boy had a talent for finding the most interesting hiding spots in the palace. Last month, the entire security team had spent 40 minutes looking for him, only to discover he had fallen asleep in a laundry basket in the servants' quarters. The East Wing of Kensington Palace housed the administrative offices and private quarters for visiting dignitaries. It was usually quiet during the day, making it the perfect place for a young prince who wanted to avoid mathematics lessons. Marcus knew he should probably alert security that Louis was in the area, but the boy wasn't in any immediate danger, and his governess would catch up with him soon enough. What Marcus didn't know was that construction workers had been renovating one of the third-floor offices for the past week. They had been installing new electrical wiring and updating the building's fire safety systems. The workers had left early the previous evening, planning to return after lunch to finish the job. The renovation had left exposed wires and temporary construction materials scattered throughout the office. More importantly, it had left behind several paint cans and chemical solvents that should have been properly stored overnight. The combination of electrical work and flammable materials was a disaster waiting to happen. Prince Louis, meanwhile, had discovered a service elevator that he had never seen before. The little prince loved elevators almost as much as he loved horses and ice cream. He pressed the call button with the same excitement other children reserved for Christmas morning. Marcus heard the soft ding of the elevator and the mechanical whir of cables and pulleys. He glanced around, trying to spot the young prince. But the East Wing's maze of corridors made it impossible to see very far in any direction. He made a mental note to mention Louis's location to Morrison during the next security check-in. The prince stepped into the elevator and examined the row of buttons like a scientist studying a complex equation. The ground floor button was boring, because that's where all the grown-ups spent their time. The second-floor button led to more boring offices and meeting rooms, but the third-floor button seemed mysterious and exciting. Louis pressed the button for the third floor and watched the doors close with satisfaction. He loved the feeling of the elevator moving, the way his stomach felt funny when it started and stopped, and the way the numbers above the door changed like magic. When the doors opened on the third floor, Prince Louis stepped into a world that looked completely different from the rest of the palace. Instead of polished marble and expensive paintings, he saw plastic sheeting, construction equipment, and the kind of organized chaos that came with renovation work. The smell hit him immediately. It was sharp and chemical, nothing like the familiar scents of furniture polish and fresh flowers that filled the rest of the palace. But 4-year-olds are naturally curious creatures, and strange smells only made the exploration more interesting. Louis wandered down the corridor, peeking into offices that were half-finished and admiring the colorful wires that hung from the ceiling like party streamers. He found paintbrushes soaking in jars of cloudy water and rolls of wallpaper that stood like soldiers along the walls. In the main office at the end of the hall, construction workers had left several space heaters running to help dry the new paint and primer. The electrical system in the building was old, and the additional load from multiple high-wattage heaters was pushing it beyond its safe limits. Marcus, 3 floors below, was beginning to feel uneasy. He had been a soldier long enough to trust his instincts, and something felt wrong. The palace was too quiet. Even when Prince Louis was hiding, you could usually hear him giggling or moving around. The silence felt heavy and unnatural. At 11:37 in the morning, an overloaded electrical outlet in the third-floor office sparked. The spark landed on a paint rag that had been soaked in turpentine and left too close to one of the space heaters. The rag smoldered for several seconds before bursting into flames. The fire spread quickly, fed by paint fumes and chemical solvents. Within minutes, thick black smoke began filling the office and seeping into the hallway. The building's fire detection system, which was being updated as part of the renovation, failed to trigger an alarm. Prince Louis, who had been examining a bucket of colorful paint in a supply closet, suddenly smelled smoke. At first, he thought it might be coming from the kitchen, where the cook sometimes burned toast or overcooked something in the oven. But this smell was different, sharper and more frightening. When he stepped out of the supply closet, the hallway was beginning to fill with gray smoke that made his eyes water and his throat feel scratchy. The 4-year-old had been taught about fire safety in his lessons, and he knew that smoke meant danger. But he also knew that he was supposed to stay where he was and call for help, not try to find his way out alone. "Help!" Prince Louis called out, his small voice barely carrying above the crackling sound of the growing fire. "Somebody help me!" Marcus, still at his post 3 floors below, heard the building's ventilation system kick into overdrive. The sudden increase in air circulation was unusual, and his military training had taught him to notice when normal patterns changed. He looked up at the ceiling vents and frowned. The first wisp of smoke appeared in the East Wing stairwell at 11:42. It was barely visible, just a faint haze that most people would have dismissed as dust or imagination. But Marcus had spent enough time in combat zones to recognize the smell of smoke immediately. His training kicked in before his conscious mind could process what was happening. Marcus broke protocol for the first time in 2 years, abandoning his post and moving quickly toward the stairwell. He pulled out his radio and called Morrison's office. "Command, this is Thompson in the East Wing. I'm detecting smoke on the lower levels. Request immediate assistance to investigate possible fire hazard." Morrison's voice crackled through the radio within seconds. "Thompson, confirm your location and maintain position. Fire services are being notified." But Marcus was already climbing the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. His polished black shoes echoed against the stone steps as he moved upward, following the increasingly thick trail of smoke. With each floor he climbed, the air became harder to breathe, and the smell became stronger. By the time he reached the 3rd floor, Marcus knew that this was no minor electrical problem or kitchen accident. The smoke was thick enough to make visibility difficult, and he could hear the unmistakable sound of flames consuming everything in their path. "Command, this is Thompson," he radioed again, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "I have confirmed structure fire on the 3rd floor of the East Wing. The situation is serious and requires immediate fire department response." That's when he heard it. A small voice, frightened and getting weaker, calling out for help from somewhere in the smoke-filled corridor ahead of him. "Help! Please! Somebody help me!" Marcus's blood ran cold as he recognized the voice of Prince Louis. The little boy who asked endless questions and had the most infectious laugh in the palace was trapped somewhere in the burning building, and Marcus was the only person who knew he was there. Every piece of training Marcus had ever received told him to wait for backup, to follow protocol, and to let the professionals handle the situation. But every instinct he had as a human being told him that a 4-year-old child was in mortal danger, and that waiting for help might mean the difference between life and death. Marcus Thompson looked down the smoke-filled corridor, pulled his red tunic up over his nose and mouth, and made the decision that would define the rest of his life. Protocol could go to hell. There was a child who needed saving, and he was the only one who could do it. The smoke hit Marcus like a physical wall as he pushed deeper into the 3rd-floor corridor. His eyes immediately began watering, and each breath felt like swallowing sandpaper. The familiar red tunic that had always made him feel proud now felt like it was suffocating him as he held it against his face, trying to filter out the worst of the toxic fumes. "Prince Louis!" Marcus called out, his voice muffled by the fabric. "Can you hear me? Keep talking so I can find you." The response came from somewhere ahead and to his right, weak but unmistakable. "I'm here. I can't see anything. It's too smoky." Marcus moved forward carefully, using the wall as his guide. The renovation work had left the corridor cluttered with equipment and supplies, and the last thing he needed was to trip over a paint can and injure himself when the prince needed him most. His polished shoes, which had always been perfect for standing at attention, were nearly useless on the dust-covered floor. The heat was getting worse with every step. Marcus could feel it radiating through the walls and ceiling, and he knew that meant the fire was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. Modern buildings were supposed to have fire suppression systems and safety barriers that would contain a blaze, but the renovation had disabled many of those protections. "Keep talking to me, Your Highness," Marcus shouted, using the formal address even in this desperate situation. Some habits ran too deep to break, even when your life was on the line. "Tell me about what you can see around you." "There's paint cans and big white sheets," Louis called back, his small voice getting hoarser by the minute. "And there's orange light coming from one of the rooms. It's really hot and scary." Marcus's heart sank as he realized that Prince Louis was describing the main office where the fire had started. The boy had managed to wander into the most dangerous part of the building, and the flames were probably blocking the most direct route to the stairs. Through the smoke, Marcus caught glimpses of the destruction around him. Paint cans had exploded from the heat, splattering colorful chemicals across the walls and floor. Plastic sheeting had melted into strange, twisted shapes that looked like modern art sculptures. Electrical wires hung from the ceiling like deadly vines, sparking occasionally and adding to the danger. "I'm coming to get you," Marcus called out. "Stay exactly where you are and try to stay low to the ground. The air is cleaner down there." The advice was sound, but Marcus knew it might already be too late. Smoke inhalation could kill someone, Prince Louis's size, in a matter of minutes, and they had already been breathing the toxic air for longer than was safe. Every second that passed decreased their chances of getting out alive. Marcus's radio crackled with urgent transmissions as the palace security team realized the scope of the emergency. Morrison's voice cut through the static, tense with controlled panic. "Thompson, what's your current status? Fire department ETA is 8 minutes. Can you confirm the location of Prince Louis? 8 minutes might as well have been 8 hours. Marcus keyed his radio while still moving forward through the smoke. "I have voice contact with Prince Louis. He's trapped near the main fire. I'm proceeding to his location for immediate extraction." "Negative, Thompson." Morrison's voice was sharp with authority. "You are not trained for fire rescue. Maintain your position and wait for professional assistance." Marcus looked ahead into the wall of smoke and made perhaps the most important decision of his life. He reached down and turned off his radio. Some orders were meant to be disobeyed, and this was one of them. The corridor seemed to stretch forever as Marcus felt his way forward. His military training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, but nothing had prepared him for the complete disorientation of navigating through thick smoke. The familiar layout of the palace had become an alien maze where every step could lead him deeper into danger or closer to salvation. "I can see a red light," Prince Louis called out, his voice much closer now. "Are you wearing your red coat?" Marcus looked down and realized that his bright red tunic was probably the only thing the prince could see through the smoke. The uniform that had always felt like a costume was now serving as a beacon of hope for a terrified child. "Yes, that's me," Marcus responded, following the sound of Louis's voice. "I'm coming to get you right now." When Marcus finally spotted Prince Louis, his heart nearly broke. The 4-year-old was huddled in a corner near the supply closet, his face streaked with tears and soot. His usually perfect blonde hair was disheveled, and his small chest was rising and falling rapidly as he struggled to breathe the toxic air. But what struck Marcus most was the trust in the boy's eyes. Despite being terrified and in mortal danger, Prince Louis's face lit up with relief when he saw the familiar red uniform approaching through the smoke. To the 4-year-old, Marcus wasn't just a royal guard anymore. He was a hero who had come to save him. "Are we going to be okay?" Prince Louis asked as Marcus knelt down beside him. The simple question hit Marcus harder than any enemy fire he had ever faced in Afghanistan. This wasn't about following orders or protecting national interests. This was about a scared little boy who trusted him to make everything right. "We're going to be fine," Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. "But I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you do that?" Prince Louis nodded solemnly, wiping his nose with the back of his small hand. The gesture was so innocent and childlike that Marcus felt a surge of determination unlike anything he had ever experienced. This child was not going to die on his watch. Marcus quickly assessed their situation. The main corridor they had come from was now completely filled with smoke, and the heat suggested that the fire had spread to block their original escape route. But his military training had taught him to always look for alternative options, and he remembered seeing a service stairway at the far end of the floor. The problem was that reaching the service stairs would mean traveling through the heart of the fire zone. The flames had spread from the main office into several adjacent rooms, and the corridor between their current position and safety was a gauntlet of heat, smoke, and falling debris. "We're going to play a game," Marcus told Prince Louis, forcing his voice to remain calm and reassuring. "I'm going to carry you, and you're going to close your eyes and hold your breath whenever I tell you to." "Can you hold your breath for a long time?" "I can hold it for almost a whole minute," Prince Louis said with the kind of pride that only a 4-year-old could muster in such a terrifying situation. "I practiced in the bathtub." Marcus smiled despite their circumstances. The boy's innocence and trust were giving him strength when his own courage might have failed him. He carefully lifted Prince Louis into his arms, positioning the child so that his face was pressed against Marcus's chest, away from the worst of the smoke. The journey to the service stairs was like traveling through hell itself. The heat was so intense that Marcus could feel it through his uniform, and the smoke was so thick that he could barely see his own hands. Burning debris fell from the ceiling as they passed underneath, and Marcus had to dodge around obstacles that appeared out of the darkness like deadly phantoms. "Hold your breath now," Marcus whispered to Prince Louis as they approached the worst section of the corridor. The little boy obediently squeezed his eyes shut and puffed out his cheeks, looking like he was about to dive underwater instead of walking through a burning building. Marcus held his own breath as much as possible, but the physical exertion of carrying a child while navigating through dangerous terrain made it impossible to avoid breathing the toxic air. He could feel his lungs burning and his head beginning to spin from the lack of oxygen, but he forced himself to keep moving forward. Halfway to the service stairs, a section of the ceiling collapsed directly in front of them, sending a shower of sparks and burning material across their path. Marcus instinctively shielded Prince Louis with his body, feeling the heat singe the back of his red tunic. "Is that fireworks?" Prince Louis asked, peeking up at the falling sparks with the curiosity that seemed to define his personality. "Something like that," Marcus replied, looking for a way around the new obstacle. The collapsed ceiling had created a barrier that was too high to climb over and too hot to approach directly. But to the left, he spotted a doorway that might lead to an alternate route. The door opened into what had once been a conference room, but was now a furnace filled with overturned furniture and melting electronics. The heat was so intense that Marcus knew they couldn't stay there for more than a few seconds, but he could see another door on the far side that might connect to the service corridor. "Big breath and close your eyes," Marcus told Prince Louis, and they plunged into the inferno together. The conference room was like running through the inside of an oven. Marcus felt his eyebrows singe and his lungs scream in protest as he sprinted across the burning carpet, dodging falling light fixtures and melting plastic. Prince Louis buried his face against Marcus's chest, trusting completely that the man in the red uniform would keep him safe. The door on the far side was locked. Marcus stared at the metal handle for a split second that felt like an eternity. They couldn't go back the way they had come because the conference room was rapidly becoming an inferno, and they couldn't stay where they were for more than another few seconds without suffering serious burns. He set Prince Louis down carefully and stepped back, focusing all of his frustration and desperation into one powerful kick. The door frame splintered and the door swung open, revealing the service corridor beyond. Marcus grabbed Prince Louis and ran through the doorway just as the conference room windows exploded outward from the heat, showering the area they had just vacated with deadly glass fragments. They were now in the service corridor, but they weren't safe yet. The air was cleaner here, but smoke was still filtering in from the main fire, and Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before the flames spread to this section as well. "You saved us," Prince Louis said with breathless admiration as Marcus set him down near the service stairs. "You broke down the door like a superhero." Marcus wanted to explain that they weren't saved yet, that they still had to get down 3 flights of stairs and out of the building before they would be truly safe. But looking into the boy's trusting eyes, he decided that some truths could wait until later. "The most important thing," Marcus said as he picked up Prince Louis again and started down the service stairs, "is that we stick together and keep moving. Are you ready for the next part of our adventure?" Prince Louis nodded enthusiastically, apparently having convinced himself that this was all an elaborate game rather than a life-or-death escape. His faith in Marcus's ability to protect him was both humbling and terrifying, because Marcus knew that their ordeal was far from over. The service stairs were narrow and steep, designed for maintenance workers rather than emergency evacuations. Marcus descended as quickly as he dared while carrying Prince Louis, but the metal steps were becoming slippery with condensation from the heat above. Each step echoed through the enclosed stairwell like a gunshot, and Marcus could hear the ominous groaning of the building structure as the fire continued to spread. "Why is everything so loud?" Prince Louis asked, his small voice barely audible above the growing cacophony of creaking metal and distant sirens. The 4-year-old had begun to realize that their adventure was more serious than he had initially thought, and his earlier excitement was giving way to genuine fear. "Buildings make noise when they're working hard," Marcus explained, trying to keep his voice calm while his mind raced through worst-case scenarios. He had been in enough dangerous situations to recognize when a structure was approaching its limits, and the sounds echoing around them suggested that they had very little time before parts of the building might start collapsing. As they reached the second-floor landing, Marcus heard voices echoing up from below. The emergency response teams had finally arrived, and the service stairwell was filling with the sound of heavy boots and urgent radio chatter. For the first time since this nightmare had started, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. "Thompson," Morrison's voice boomed up the stairwell. "Is that you?" "Yes, sir," Marcus called back, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. "I have Prince Louis. We're coming down." The next few seconds were a blur of activity as emergency responders flooded into the stairwell. Marcus found himself surrounded by paramedics, firefighters, and security personnel, all of them talking at once and trying to assess the situation. "Let me take him," said a paramedic with kind eyes and gentle hands. She was a middle-aged woman with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of handling medical emergencies. But Prince Louis, who had been remarkably brave throughout their escape, suddenly clung to Marcus's uniform with surprising strength. "I want to stay with the redcoat man," he said firmly. "He's the one who saved me." Marcus looked down at the little boy who had shown such trust in him and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about duty or following orders anymore. Somewhere in that smoke-filled corridor, he had stopped being a royal guard and had become something more important. He had become Prince Louis's protector, and the boy was making it clear that their bond couldn't be easily broken. "It's okay," Marcus told Prince Louis gently. "These are the good people I told you about. They're going to make sure you're healthy and safe, but I'll stay right here with you, okay?" The paramedic smiled with understanding and began her examination while Prince Louis remained in Marcus's arms. She checked his breathing, looked into his eyes with a small flashlight, and listened to his heartbeat with a stethoscope that fascinated the young prince. "His vitals are surprisingly good," the paramedic announced to the group. "Some smoke inhalation, but nothing that appears life-threatening. We'll want to get him to the hospital for a more thorough evaluation, but he's going to be fine." Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. He had been running on pure adrenaline for so long that the good news hit him like a physical blow. Prince Louis was going to be okay. They had both made it out alive, and that was all that mattered. "What about you?" the paramedic asked, turning her attention to Marcus. "How are you feeling?" Marcus started to say that he was fine, but the words caught in his throat as a violent coughing fit seized him. He had been so focused on keeping Prince Louis safe that he hadn't paid attention to his own condition. Now that the immediate danger was over, his body was beginning to react to the abuse it had endured. "Sit down right here," the paramedic instructed firmly, guiding Marcus to a step where he could rest while still holding Prince Louis. "You've inhaled a significant amount of smoke, and your body needs time to process that." As the medical team worked, Marcus became aware of the chaos surrounding them. The entire east wing of Kensington Palace had been evacuated, and emergency vehicles filled the courtyard with flashing lights and urgent activity. Fire crews were battling the blaze with everything they had, sending massive streams of water into the building through windows that had been shattered by the heat. Morrison appeared at Marcus's side, his usually composed face showing a mixture of relief and barely controlled fury. "Thompson, what the hell were you thinking? You violated direct orders and put yourself in mortal danger." "He saved me," Prince Louis interrupted before Marcus could respond. The little boy fixed Morrison with the kind of indignant stare that only royalty could manage. "He's a hero! He broke down a door and carried me through the fire and everything." Morrison's expression softened as he looked at the soot-covered child in Marcus's arms. Whatever disciplinary action he had been considering would have to wait. The important thing was that Prince Louis was safe, and there was no denying that Marcus's decision to break protocol had probably saved the boy's life. "We'll discuss this later," Morrison said quietly to Marcus. "Right now, let's focus on getting both of you the medical attention you need." The journey to the hospital was surreal for Marcus. He sat in the back of an ambulance, still wearing his smoke-stained red tunic, watching as paramedics fussed over Prince Louis, with the kind of attention usually reserved for visiting heads of state. Which, Marcus realized, was exactly what the 4-year-old was. Prince Louis had been given an oxygen mask to help clear his lungs, but he kept pushing it aside to talk to Marcus. "Are you going to get in trouble for saving me?" he asked with the kind of insight that was sometimes startling in small children. "I don't know," Marcus answered honestly. "But even if I do, it was the right thing to do. Sometimes grown-ups have to break rules when someone needs help. My mummy says that rules are important," Prince Louis said thoughtfully. "But she also says that helping people is more important than rules. I think you did the right thing." The wisdom of a 4-year-old, Marcus thought to himself. Sometimes the most complex moral questions had the simplest answers. At the hospital, Marcus and Prince Louis were separated, for the first time since their ordeal began. The prince was whisked away to a private medical suite where royal physicians could conduct thorough examinations away from the public eye. Marcus was taken to a regular emergency room, where he was treated like any other patient suffering from smoke inhalation. The medical evaluation was routine but thorough. Marcus's lungs were clear despite his exposure to smoke, and his only injuries were minor burns on his hands and the back of his neck where falling debris had touched his skin. The doctor, a tired-looking man in his 40s, seemed impressed by Marcus's overall condition. "You're in excellent physical shape," the doctor observed as he cleaned the burns. "That probably helped you more than you realize. Someone in poorer condition might not have been able to carry a child through that kind of environment." And Marcus nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Prince Louis, wondering how the boy was handling the medical tests and whether he was frightened without his impromptu protector nearby. The bond they had formed during their escape felt stronger than anything Marcus had experienced in his military service. A knock on the examination room door interrupted his thoughts. A woman in an elegant blue dress entered, followed by 2 security guards who positioned themselves discreetly near the entrance. Marcus recognized her immediately from countless photographs and official portraits. This was Catherine, the Princess of Wales, Prince Louis's mother. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying genuine warmth and gratitude, "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did today. My son tells me you saved his life." Marcus attempted to stand and bow, but the princess gestured for him to remain seated. "No formality necessary," she said with a smile. "You've already done more than enough." "How is Prince Louis?" Marcus asked, unable to keep the concern out of his voice. "He's perfectly fine. Thanks to you," the princess replied. "The doctors say he'll make a complete recovery. But he's been asking for the Redcoat Man constantly. He wants to make sure you're okay." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with his medical condition. The idea that Prince Louis was worried about him after everything the boy had been through was almost overwhelming. "He's a remarkable child," Marcus said, "brave and smart. He did everything I asked him to do, even when he was scared. I couldn't have saved him if he hadn't trusted me." The princess nodded, her eyes glistening slightly. "Louis has always been good at reading people. He knew he could trust you, and he was right." She paused, studying Marcus's face. "I understand you're a former soldier?" "Yes, ma'am. Army sergeant, served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining palace security." "And what made you decide to break protocol today?" "You must have known there would be consequences." Marcus considered his answer carefully. This was a question that could define the rest of his career, and possibly his life. But as he thought about Prince Louis's trusting eyes and the weight of the child in his arms as they escaped through the smoke, the answer became crystal clear. "Because some things are more important than following orders," Marcus said simply. "I became a soldier to protect people, and I became a royal guard for the same reason. Today, Prince Louis needed protection, and I was the only one who could provide it. The rules didn't matter, his life did." The princess smiled, and Marcus could see where Prince Louis had inherited his ability to light up a room with his expression. "That's exactly what I hoped you would say," she said, "and it's exactly why I wanted to speak with you personally." Marcus wondered what she meant by that, but before he could ask, another knock came at the door. This time it was Morrison, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit whom Marcus didn't recognize. "Thompson?" Morrison said, his voice carrying an official tone that suggested this was more than a social visit. "I'd like you to meet Sir David Hamilton from the royal household. He has something he'd like to discuss with you." As Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Sir David Hamilton was one of the most senior officials in the royal household, the kind of man who decided the fates of people much more important than a simple palace guard. If he was here personally, it meant that Marcus's decision to break protocol was going to have serious consequences. But as Marcus prepared himself for whatever was coming, he found that he felt no regret about his actions. Whatever price he had to pay for saving Prince Louis would be worth it. Some choices transcended career concerns and personal consequences. Sir David stepped forward with a formal bearing that made Marcus automatically straighten his posture. "Mr. Thompson," the official said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of royal tradition. "We need to discuss your future." Marcus Thompson sat perfectly still in the hospital chair, his smoke-stained red tunic a stark contrast to the pristine white walls around him. Sir David Hamilton's words hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall, and Marcus prepared himself for the end of his career. He had known this moment would come from the second he turned off his radio and disobeyed Morrison's direct orders. "Thompson," Sir David continued, his expression unreadable, "your actions today have created quite a situation for us. You violated protocol, ignored direct commands from your superior, and put yourself in mortal danger without authorization." Marcus nodded, accepting the inevitable. "Yes, sir. I understand the consequences of my actions." "Do you?" Sir David asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because I'm not entirely certain you do." The older man moved to the window, gazing out at the emergency vehicles still surrounding Kensington Palace in the distance. The fire had been contained, but smoke was still rising from the east wing like a monument to the day's chaos. "Tell me, Thompson," Sir David said without turning around, "what do you think the role of the Royal Guard truly is?" Marcus considered the question carefully. It felt like a test, and he suspected that his answer might determine whether he walked out of this room as an employed man or a civilian facing criminal charges. "To protect the royal family, sir," Marcus replied. "To serve as a visible symbol of the crown's security, and to ensure that no harm comes to those in our care." Sir David turned back to face him, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's the textbook answer, Mr. Thompson. But today you demonstrated something that goes far beyond textbooks and protocol manuals." Marcus felt confusion replacing his resignation. This wasn't going at all the way he had expected. "You see," Sir David continued, "we can train anyone to stand at attention and follow orders. We can teach protocol and procedure until they become second nature. But we cannot train someone to make the kind of split-second decision you made today. We cannot teach someone to risk their life for a child without hesitation or calculation." The Princess of Wales, who had been silent throughout this exchange, stepped forward. "Louis has been telling everyone who will listen about his adventure with the Red Coat Man," she said with evident pride. "He's drawn you pictures and insisted that you be invited to his birthday party next month. But more than that, he feels safe because of what you did. That kind of trust is precious beyond measure." Marcus looked between the two royal representatives, struggling to understand what was happening. "I'm sorry, but I'm not following. Are you saying I'm not being disciplinary action?" Morrison, who had been standing silently near the door, finally spoke up. "Thompson, what you did today was either the most irresponsible breach of security protocol in palace history, or it was the most heroic act I've ever witnessed. Given that Prince Louis is alive and well because of your actions, I'm inclined to believe it was the latter." Sir David nodded approvingly. "Which brings us to your future, Mr. Thompson. Your current position as a ceremonial guard is obviously no longer suitable for someone with your initiative." Marcus's heart sank. He was being reassigned, probably to some desk job where his tendency to make independent decisions couldn't cause problems. It was better than being fired, but it still felt like punishment for doing the right thing. "We would like to offer you a position as Prince Louis's personal protection officer," Sir David announced. "It would mean a significant increase in responsibility, additional training in executive protection, and direct reporting to the senior security team. Your military background and demonstrated dedication to Prince Louis's welfare make you the ideal candidate." Marcus stared at the distinguished official, certain he had misheard. "I'm sorry, sir. Could you repeat that?" The Princess of Wales laughed, a sound that reminded Marcus of Prince Louis's infectious giggle. "He's offering you a promotion, Mr. Thompson. Louis specifically requested that you be assigned as his bodyguard, and frankly, after what happened today, we can't think of anyone we'd trust more with his safety." The enormity of what they were offering began to sink in. Personal protection for a member of the royal family was one of the most prestigious and challenging positions in security. It required absolute trust from the family, extensive training, and a level of responsibility that went far beyond standing guard at palace entrances. "I don't know what to say," Marcus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Say yes," came a small voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Prince Louis peeking around the doorframe, having apparently escaped from his medical supervision once again. He was wearing a hospital gown that was far too big for him and clutching a small stuffed lion that someone had given him. "Your Highness," Morrison said sternly, "you're supposed to be resting. I wanted to see if the red coat man was okay," Prince Louis said, ignoring the security chief and walking directly to Marcus. "Are you going to be my special guard now? Mummy said you might be." Marcus looked down at the brave little boy who had trusted him completely during the most terrifying experience of both their lives. The decision that had seemed so monumental just moments before suddenly became simple. "If you want me to be," Marcus said, kneeling down to Prince Louis's eye level, "then yes, I'd be honored to be your special guard." Prince Louis's face lit up with pure joy. "Will you still wear the red coat?" "I think I might get a new uniform," Marcus replied with a smile. "But I'll always be the same person who came to find you in the smoke." "Good," Prince Louis said with satisfaction, "because you're the bravest person I know." 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in the same east wing of Kensington Palace, but everything had changed. The fire damage had been completely repaired, with new safety systems installed throughout the building. The corridor where he had carried Prince Louis through smoke and flames now gleamed with fresh paint and modern fire suppression equipment. Marcus himself had changed as well. Gone was the ceremonial red tunic, replaced by the understated suit and earpiece of a personal protection officer. He had completed an intensive training program in executive protection, defensive driving, threat assessment, and a dozen other skills that his new role required. But the most significant change was in his relationship with Prince Louis. The 4-year-old had grown more confident and outgoing since their shared ordeal, as if surviving something so frightening had given him a new perspective on what he could handle. He still asked endless questions and got into minor trouble on a regular basis, but now he had a shadow who followed his every move. "Marcus," Prince Louis said as they walked through the renovated corridor, "do you think we'll ever have another adventure like our fire adventure?" Marcus smiled, remembering the terror of that day and the trust that had grown from it.
"I hope not, Your Highness. That was quite enough adventure for one lifetime."
"But if we did," Prince Louis pressed on with the persistence that defined his personality, "would you come save me again?" Marcus knelt down to look Prince Louis in the eye, just as he had in the hospital room 6 months earlier. "Louis," he said seriously, "I will always come for you, no matter what happens, no matter how dangerous it is, and no matter who tells me not to. That's a promise." Prince Louis nodded solemnly, satisfied with the answer. Then his serious expression dissolved into the mischievous grin that Marcus had come to know so well. "Race you to the garden," he called out, taking off at a run toward the exit. Marcus followed at a measured pace, speaking into his radio to alert the outdoor security team of Prince Louis's location and intended activities. It was all routine now, part of the careful choreography that kept a young prince safe while allowing him to be a normal child. As they emerged into the sunlight of the palace gardens, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. He had started as a ceremonial guard whose biggest worry was keeping his uniform pristine. Now he was responsible for protecting one of the most precious children in the world, and he wouldn't trade that responsibility for anything. The official investigation into the fire had concluded that it was an accident caused by faulty electrical work and improper storage of flammable materials. New safety protocols had been implemented, and the renovation procedures had been completely overhauled. But Marcus knew that the real lesson of that day wasn't about fire safety or building codes. Sometimes the most important moments in life came down to simple choices. You could follow the rules and wait for someone else to take action, or you could trust your instincts and do what you knew was right, regardless of the consequences. Marcus had chosen to act, and that choice had saved a life, changed 2 careers, and created a bond that would last forever. Standing in the palace garden, watching Prince Louis chase butterflies with the same enthusiasm he had shown before their ordeal, Marcus realized that he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. He had found his purpose. The red tunic he had worn that day was now framed in his apartment, a reminder of the moment when everything changed. The fabric was still stained with smoke and singed from falling debris, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to have it cleaned. Those stains represented the most important thing he had ever done, and the moment when he discovered who he really was. Prince Louis's laughter echoed across the garden as he discovered a particularly beautiful butterfly, and Marcus smiled as he followed at a respectful distance. He was no longer just a guard standing at attention. He was a protector, a guardian, and most importantly, a friend to a remarkable little boy who had taught him that sometimes courage meant caring more about someone else's life than your own career. In the distance, tourists gathered at the palace gates, hoping for a glimpse of royalty. They probably imagined that life inside the palace was all ceremony and tradition, formal events and rigid protocol. They couldn't know about the laughter in the corridors, the spontaneous games of hide-and-seek, or the quiet moments when a former soldier and a young prince shared stories about bravery and trust. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, Marcus Thompson stood watch over the future King of England, knowing that he had found his calling in the most unexpected way possible. He had learned that being a hero wasn't about wearing the right uniform or following the right orders. Being a hero was about making the choice to act when someone needed you, even if the whole world told you it was wrong. It was about putting someone else's life before your own safety and trusting that doing the right thing would somehow work out in the end. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it meant spending your days protecting a giggling 4-year-old who thought you were the bravest person in the world and who trusted you enough to race ahead into whatever adventure came next, knowing that you would always be right behind him, ready to keep him safe no matter what dangers lay ahead.